Hello and welcome. For this video we'll show the assembly of the gantry, the base, the Y gantry assembly, and the router mount. Okay, so this is where we really need a flat surface so we don't tweak anything. And we're going to take the Y plates that we assembled earlier, spread them out, and then put in extrusion E and a B into their right places. And then take the 16mm button head bolts and attach the extrusions to one side. Okay, so make sure you have the cavity of extrusion E facing towards the square hole right here. And then just use these 6 bolts to tighten everything down. Alright, to make it a little bit more visible of what goes on next, I want to just rotate this here. Alright, so we have 4 of the T-nuts right here, and 2 go in top and 2 go in the bottom. Okay, but the little indent goes to the back while the flat of the T-nut goes to the outside. Okay, now that the T-nuts are in, we can just take the X carriage that we assembled and slide that on in. And then put the Y plate back into place. And then secure the other side with the 16mm bolts. Okay, for the next step we're going to be putting in the lead X screw, but before I get to that, they ask you to have it extend out of the plate 14mm, and the 12mm button head bolt, as you can see right here, is a pretty good indicator of that at 14.29 or 14.3. So that will be my measurement guide for this. Okay, so the gantry position is to where the cavity on extrusion E here is facing towards you, and the drag chain mount is on the right side. And we just take the lead screw, pop it through the hole, then add the flange bearing to where it will recess into the plate, and then the rubber bushing. And then one of the clamping collars. Okay, and then just hold it into place and thread it through the nut blocks and continue threading until you hit the other side. Okay, just like the other side, just an opposite. Add on a clamping collar, the rubber bushing, and the flange bearing so it recesses into the plate. Okay, so using the 12mm button head bolt, I'm dragging the lead screw up into position where it's at 14mm out. And from there, I'm just going to slide everything over while holding the position and lock everything into place. And then do the same for the other side. Okay, so moving on to step 5, and as you can see, I only have a single part of each for this step. The reason being is that, namely, these 2 washers right here, the thrust bearing shaft washer and the thrust bearing housing washer, are nearly identical except for the internal diameter. Okay, and this is also the first step where you get to use a little bit of grease. So I'm going to put the housing washer there and the shaft washer there, and then put some bit more grease on my finger, and then in this groove I'm going to place that grease. As they say, put a generous amount, but my hands are way too big to do this. So I guess I'm just going to try to fill that groove as best as I can. Okay, so this is the right Y plate, and as you can tell, you're looking at it from the back. As you can see, the lead screw within the cavity. And what we're going to do is take the nylon shoulder washer, and it has a little flange right there that allows it to recess within the plate. And then you take the housing washer that you just lubed up and make sure that the groove or trench, whatever you want to call it, is facing to the outside. And then we have the caged roller that will set in there. And the shaft washer, and again make sure you have the groove or trench facing to the inside this time. And this one is a little bit tighter fit. And then last we have the clamping collar that will go on. Just apply a bit of pressure and tighten it up. Okay, so we are on the left side now, or the side with the chain mount, and everything's pretty much the same except that we're going to use a flexible coupler to secure everything down with. Okay, and then as before, put the nylon washer where it recedes into the plate, and then put the housing washer so that the groove is to the outside, then the caged roller, and then the shaft washer, and make sure the groove is to the inside. Okay, and then the flexible coupler, and keep some pressure on it, and then grab your key and tighten everything. Grab the right key and then tighten the clamping collar first, and then tighten up the grub screw next. Okay, so we're orientated to the front of the machine now, and we're also going to be using those T-nuts that we slid in. Okay, I'm going to keep mine out for a smidge and then insert the 8mm M5 bolt into it, the T-nut, but just not tightening up all the way, leaving it a bit loose. Reason being is it's a lot easier for me to screw it in right out there as opposed to right here where I'm going to be hitting that plate. Okay, and slide everything over, tighten up that. Okay, then just inserting 2 of the 16mm M5 bolts. You might have to screw them to get past the head of the other. And then same for the other side. Okay, and then for both sides, going to add a precision shim and the M5 nylon nut. And then tighten the ones to the T-nuts. And then same for the other side. Okay, so we're on the last step here for the gantry, and what we're going to do is just drop in the 50mm cap head bolts into the stepper motor, and then put on the 40mm Aluminium-Spacers, and see how much I can control at once, and keep the wire of the stepper motor down to the bottom, and then slide it into the shaft first, or a coupler, and then just edge it on up. I'm just going to tighten one at a time so I get this nice and even. Okay, and then tighten all the others the rest of the way down. And then back to the coupler, we're going to hit the clamping screw first, and then we're going to go for the grub screw. So now moving on to the base assembly, and we need to prep 16 of these universal brackets. Okay, to do so, just grab one of the universal brackets, drop in the 8mm M5 bolt, flip it over, and then take a T-nut, making sure that the flat end faces towards the universal bracket, and barely thread it on. Then again, and the other side. Okay, 15 more. Okay, for the next steps, you want to make sure that you're absolutely on a level surface. I thought that this was, however, I'm getting a little bit of like 1 or 2 mil bounce, so I'm going to have to switch to the floor. Okay, so before we go to the next step, I'm going to show you on the universal bracket right here, we have one side where the hull is closer to the edge, and on this side it is closer to the corner. The side that we want to deal with right now is the side that's closer to the corner, and that will go into the extrusion. Okay, so we take the side of the bracket that's closer to the corner, set it up to slide it on in. Okay, so the bracket here is supposed to be flush with the end, and the easiest way to think of doing that is to take an empty bracket, put it on the edge right there, and pinch it in, and then tighten everything up. Then do the other side the same way. Okay, and what you get is extrusion C with 2 of these on one edge. So I'm going to have to do 1, 2, 7 more, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so now comes the tedious portion of sliding everything that we've done so far into the extrusion A bits. Okay, for the next step we need 80 millimeters from the edge of the A extrusion to the edge of C extrusion right here. So got the old adjustable square out and going to use that as a marker and tighten it all down, and then doing the other side. So I'm satisfied with the 80 millimeters from there to there, so I'm going to tighten up the other side of this extrusion on both sides and then do the opposite side. Okay, so I have both extrusion C's tightened up on both sides, and I did a measurement from corner to corner both ways and got a measurement of 141 millimeters, so that is about as square as it's going to get. So as far as the inner extrusions are concerned, I'm just using this as a rough guide and putting this to the edge and getting the edge there, and the same for the other side, and then I'm going to tighten it down. Okay, so it's time to put the extrusion F through the gantry here, and I have it sitting in the middle as I'm working by myself, and just going to slide one side in at a time. And then attach the Y plates, and then slide it to where the end of the Y plate is flush with the extrusion, and tighten her on down just to where it's taut. And then do the same for the other 3. And then drop in the 16 millimeter bolts. Okay, so it's time for the binding check, and what we do, we slide this all the way to the back. Then we loosen up the 12 mil bolts on the front of the plates here and on the other side. And then we slide this all the way forward. And then tighten up the bolts all the way on both sides. And then we follow the same process again of loosening the bolts and then sliding the gantry all the way back and retightening all the bolts. Okay, so it's time to put in the Y-axis lead screws. So what we're going to do, we're just going to put both of them through the front left and front right, and then we'll put on a flanged bearing, and then the rubber bushing, and then a clamping collar. And repeat the same for the right side. Then I'm going to push it about midway through. Okay, then draw the gantry back until I meet up with the nut block, and while keeping tension on the flange bearing here, I'm going to thread through the nut block until it goes through both of the nut blocks and I start to see some lead screw on the other side. And then thread the other side. Okay, so we have it close to the edge right now, and what we're going to do is same as we did before, just in reverse. Clamping collar, the rubber bushing, and the flange bearing, ensuring that it will go recess through the plate. And then I have a adjustable square now set up for 14 mil, and I'm just going to thread everything forward and then measure off 14 millimeters and slightly tighten everything up, and then do the same for the other side. Okay, so I have the parts laid out as they're going to go on, and before I start putting the end bits on here, I'm going to lube up the washers as indicated by the instructions. Okay, and then it's just going in sequence. Put on the nylon washer so that it recesses into the plate, and put the washer so the grease, and then put on the bearing roller, and the other washer where the groove grease section is facing towards the bearing roller, and lastly a locking collar. Push it to make some pressure and tighten it on down. Okay, and then I want to do the other front as well. Okay, so now to the back of the machine, and everything's going to be lined up the same, except instead of using a clamping collar, we're going to be using this coupler. Nut, greased washer, bearing, another greased washer, and then the flexible here. And on this, I'm putting some pressure on it. Want to tighten up the collar first. In order for me to roll these around to get to the grub screw, I have to use both of them at the same time, and then tighten up the grub screw. And do the same for the other side. Okay, so for the next step of the angle corners, what I'm going to do is take the flat T-nut here, put it in the slot, then take my driver and give it a good tap. So it's ready for me to use. And next, I'm going to drop in 8mm bolt into the angle corner, then slightly thread it on to where the catching point, the flat point, is facing to the angle corner. And then I'm going to put it into the bottom groove of extrusion F. Give it a couple of turns just to firm it up. Okay, and I'm going to slide the flat T-nut, and then I want to tighten up to the extrusion F first, and then to the bottom. Okay, and do the other 3 corners, and done with that step. Okay, so it's time to install the stepper motors, and I have the stepper motor here with the wires to the bottom and the flat side of the shaft to the top. As well, on the coupler here, I have the grub screw facing upwards. Okay, so going to insert these. I already have the 50mm bolts on, just need 40mm spacers. And then tighten them all the way down once you have everyone in. And here's the hard part, because you're supposed to tighten the clamping side of the coupler before you tighten the grub screw. So I haven't orientated where the flat side of the shaft is up, so I do hit a good square on the grub screw. So it's just a bit of a pain, but it can be done. And the last step of this phase is putting the end plates on all 4 sides. Okay, so it's the last step of the mechanical portion, and that's the router mount. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the Z bracket, put it onto the mount here, and drop in these 10mm, not 8mm, as they say in the instruction, and tighten them on down. And now it's time for the drop-in T-nuts. I'm just going to put 4 bolts right there, and slightly thread each of these with the flat side of them facing the router mount. And do the other side the same way. And to prep the height reference tool, we'll just drop in a couple of the 12mm bolts and loosely thread on the drop-in T-nuts. And lastly, for the prep, I'm just going to drop the 25mm cap head into position right there and loosely thread it in. Okay, so now that we have everything prepped, it's time to put the height tool on. Okay, make sure that you have some tension on the bottom to push it up. And now for the router mount, and what I should have done before is make sure that all of the drop-in nuts are vertical. Then place them in, drop the router down, and still keeping forward pressure, doing the top row first. Okay, so you have to make sure that the drop-in nuts are actually folding over and pulling off the extrusion. So if it goes like this one right here, where it falls to the side and tightens up, that's great. But if it's like this one where it's just pulled straight through vertically, all you have to do is back this off. Back it off a little bit more. Oh, there we go. And tighten it on up. And now that the top and bottom have been tightened, we can take the height tool off. And now that it's off, also check for the T-nuts to be pulling on the extrusion. Okay, so this concludes this portion of the video and the mechanical portion of the assembly. Next video I will cover the spark attrition side and hopefully get this thing up and running soon.